So by now, we all know Apple Silicon Macs are coming, but the question I have is, what are we actually going to see? At least what are we going to see early on? This transition from Intel to Apple Silicon is supposed to take around 2 years, and time is ticking. I mean, having to replace and update every single Mac in the line in 2 years, it's something that Apple hasn't done in a long time. You know, we see incremental updates like once a year per product line if we're lucky, and for certain ones like the Mac Pro, I mean, we don't expect to see updates very often at all. By all accounts and all rumors, we're expecting a MacBook or a MacBook Pro to be the first type of Apple Silicon Mac that we see. And that makes sense because if you look at the power of the iPad Pro and the A12Z, well, that easily translates over to a MacBook, which already has a similar power to the iPad Pro. But man, I'm not happy with that. Or at least I think there's going to be more. This has no basis in anything. This is what I think is going to happen. Okay, so at WWDC, we were all expecting a ton of hardware and we saw none of it. It was all software. Now, the biggest thing I think a lot of us were expecting was that new iMac. Now, the current rumor is that iMac is still coming and it's supposed to have an Intel chip, which I just don't understand. On one hand, I get that that's probably why they didn't talk about it at WWDC. It would be really weird to say we're switching over to ARM and then literally the next sentence is, oh, here's a new iMac with Intel. That it just doesn't line up. The messaging isn't quite there. So I understand that. But there's this thought in the back of my head that I think this is going to be the first Mac with an ARM chip, or at least it's going to be the most important one. Like I said, the A12Z that's in the iPad Pro is very similar performance-wise to what we have in our current MacBooks. You know, comparing that to a MacBook Air, it's more powerful. Comparing it to a 13-inch MacBook Pro, it's about on par. And that's very impressive. That's without really any tweaking. That's just iOS versus what we have from Intel. And Apple has really only made mobile chips since we've seen them make their own processors. We've had it from the iPhone to the iPad, and that is basically all we've seen. And, you know, really, when you think of ARM, that's what you think of. You think of mobile devices, but that's not necessarily the case. A ARM architecture doesn't mean it's limited to mobile devices. That's just what it's been used for the most part. But what we haven't seen from Apple, and I think is really key to selling that they can actually make this transition, is a desktop class Apple Silicon chip. They've always made these processors that make sense on a phone, makes sense on an iPad, but what are we going to see when they have to replace it for the Mac Pro? And that's where I think this new iMac comes in. Now, the rumor is we are going to see an Intel version of this redesigned iMac. It's supposed to have an iPad-like design, which I'm all for. I love the design of the current iPad Pro. I always love that squared off design, and I mean, the current iMac desperately needs a refresh. Now, we're also expecting to see a 24-inch, which is a new size from the 21-inch that we currently have, and the same 27-inch. Now, we've also heard rumors that besides the 24 and the 27-inch updated iMacs, we'll also see a more top-end version, which is the 32-inch size, similar to what we have with the Pro Display XDR, that size. So yes, I think we're going to see a new Intel iMac, but I think it's important if we see at least one SKU or one version that has Apple Silicon inside. This would prove or showcase what Apple can really do. I mean, Craig Federighi himself said that Apple's not really even trying with the A12Z and the Mac Mini Developer Kit. So it would show what Apple could do with a desktop level Apple Silicon chip. And I think that's something that we need to see. We need to see what these chips can actually do instead of just showing that they work, which is what we saw at WWDC. The iMac is the perfect computer for that. I mean, yeah, the Mac Mini technically is a desktop computer, but the iMac is really like the flagship consumer product for a desktop computer from Apple. So if they can really pull off something amazing there, or at least equally as good as something that you get from Intel, then I think it would raise excitement for what we could see when they push it even further for something like the Mac Pro. So they would have the best of both worlds, for those people that need a computer now and they know that they're investing in something that isn't really going to last quite as long, but they need a computer that runs Intel, that runs all their stuff. Well, this computer is available, but here's what we can do with an iMac that has our own silicon in it. I think that makes the most sense, and I think that's what they're going to do. Real quick, before we continue, I want to thank this video's sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes that help you learn for really anything that is creative. They have classes in design, illustration, photography, videography, business. I mean, really anything that is in that creative field, Skillshare has a class for you. And especially right now, you might have a little bit more time on your hands, or you're trying to learn something new, just better yourself. Skillshare is the perfect way to do that. I've been starting a little side project, which you'll see very soon, but one of my favorite classes is how to design great merch. Hint, hint, from Aaron Draplin. He's one of my favorite designers, and he has a class that he will teach you how he designs and his thought process. It's awesome. Skillshare Premium is less than $10 a month, and with that, you get unlimited classes. You can take as many as you want, whenever you want. So if this sounds like something that you want to check out, which you definitely should, the first 1,000 of you to hit the link down in the description will get 2 free months of Skillshare Premium, so you can check it out and get learning. Another reason I'm expecting, or at least hoping, that this is what we will see is because, I mean, you would expect that Apple, the reason they would make this transition is because they can do more with full control. You know, they want to control everything so that they can make the products that they want. So if they just create a new computer that just has an ARM chip, and it's basically the same thing as what you would have with an Intel chip, like the design is the same, the way it works is the same. I mean, what's the point? Like, what was the benefit of making that transition? Obviously, long term, there's big benefits, but if you're already making a totally new design, a new computer, why not go all out? The other question is, who would buy this iMac that still has an Intel chip when you know it's going to be obsolete in just a few years, less years than normally with a Mac? I have an iMac from 2013 that I am just waiting to replace, but if they announce this new iMac and it only has Intel chips, I'm not going to update it because I know very soon they're going to release the one that will actually last years and years. One that I don't have to worry about getting software updates or even getting OS updates. I mean, those questions still aren't really answered from Apple. So announcing these new Intel Macs, I just don't get it. Again, I just keep coming back to that 2-year transition. That's incredibly fast for how Apple normally moves. So that means these high-end processors that I'm assuming they're making are already in the works and probably close to finish, and they have to put them into products very soon. And we're supposed to be seeing the first ARM Macs before the end of the year. So what better way to kind of announce and show to the world what these silicon chips can do? You know, you have the entry-level, really lightweight, thin, maybe even no fans, power efficient, great battery life in a MacBook Pro, or a MacBook Air. And then you also have, here's what we can do with a desktop level chip that we have designed as Apple. I think that just makes the most sense across the board, but also I don't really know anything, so anything is possible. We have heard from analyst Ming-Chi Kuo that apparently this 24-inch model will be one of the first with the ARM chip, so there is some validity there. So that is what I think is going to happen, but more importantly, what I hope is going to happen. I want to see these new Macs. I actually have Macs that I need to upgrade, but at the same time, I want to buy one if it's just going to be an Intel chip when I know the Apple Silicon is on the horizon. Either way though, it's an exciting time for the Mac, but I don't know when to buy a computer anymore.